So we'll go right into our conversations for this afternoon. Our topic is ensuring sustainable food and nutrition security amidst climate change. No doubt, climate change, food insecurity, and malnutrition are interconnected challenges that have to be addressed in a collaborative and sustainable manner to address or accelerate achievement of a number of sustainable development goals and indeed the Paris Agreement. And for such issues that are deeply interconnected, the need to be very deliberate at managing the potential trade-offs and leveraging on the synergies that do exist to ensure that we achieve maximum impact is very, very critical. And in doing so, we understand and realize the need for addressing the various impacts that emerge from issues around climate change, and on the other side, the impacts that also do arise from agriculture and food systems activities on the environment. And in addressing a couple of these, I believe in the course of various conversations that we had in the course of this morning, we had listened to these. And definitely issues around implementing climate-smart agricultural practices, National Action Plan on Climate Change, Gender, and Gender. We'll kick off with the fact that data has shown that food systems activities account for a third of global greenhouse gas emissions, and Nigeria contributes a higher proportion of that as well. And food systems are extremely susceptible to climate change, facing numerous biophysical impacts on agricultural production, socio-economic impacts, and indeed access to nutritious and safe diets. So I'll start with you, Michael. What are some of the ways that food systems activities impact on our environment, and how is climate change contributing to increased food and nutrition insecurity?
Thank you, Joyce, for that. So we are sitting here in Abuja, in Nigeria, a country that, and these are the figures I have, things may have changed, is the fourth largest emitter of carbon. In Africa, a continent that contributes less than 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And so I guess people might be wondering, why are we so exercised about all of this? But when we think about the interconnections between climate and food security and nutrition security, we have to be exercised. There are things that we can do around mitigation, so reducing our emissions. But in Africa, in Nigeria, we are disproportionately vulnerable to the impacts of already locked in carbon, which we already see around us. But also, Joyce gave the figure, I think globally, by a third of emissions are connected to food systems. In Nigeria, that's about 25% because we have oil. But we already see those impacts in increasing temperatures, in irregular rainfall patterns, in increasing incidences of flooding, which is already affecting crop yields, in soil degradation from the flooding, but also from desertification and deforestation, and the impact of all of that on the quality of the food that is available to us because of the nutrient loss in our soil. So these impacts they are here, they are now, they are increasing. So we have to respond to this. And this is some of the things that we see. But how does the food system itself impact climate? So I've got maybe some figures more globally because I don't have so much for Nigeria. But 70% of the abstractions, freshwater abstractions that we make, is to invest or to use it on food systems. About 70% of the biodiversity loss that we see on land and 50% in freshwater systems is connected to food systems interventions. 80% of deforestation that we see is connected to food systems, to growing food. 40% of the land that is habitable is used by food systems. And unfortunately also, we produce some of these foods, but 40% of that food is actually lost and wasted, which then gets disposed and contributes to greenhouse gas emissions and so on. And so these are the interconnections. And I'm speaking here really just to set the scene initially, because I'm sure that we're going to have an opportunity to move beyond talking about the intersections to what are the interconnected actions that we can take to secure co-benefits both for food security and nutrition and for climate change. And it's critical for us because as a country, currently, 4 out of 5 households are food insecure. Let that sink in. A third of our children are stunted, which means they're too short for their age, which is an indication of chronic malnutrition in the early years. We have about a quarter of our women of reproductive age who suffer from micronutrient deficiencies, which has an implication on their ability, on their health and well-being, but also has implications for them at childbirth. These are the impacts that we see in terms of the implications of climate on our food systems and food systems on our climate. And I only have 3 minutes, so let me stop there, and I'll have a chance to come back with some more later on.
Thank you very much, Michael. I mean, indeed, recent data did show that torrential rainfalls in 2024 damaged over 1.5 million hectares of cropland across about 29 states. And this has a negative impact across over 9 or 10 million people. And this has also increased the incidences of food insecurity, and the projections for 2025 are about 33 million Nigerians would be food insecure. So this just shows us the need for urgent action, to address some of these challenges. There have been proven holistic interventions throughout the food value chain, including diet consumption that typically would drive progress towards greater resilience, towards improved and better adaptation, and also towards reduction of the negative impacts of environment. Chinedu, what do you think are some of the most promising interventions to livelihoods, nutrition, and environmental outcomes that we should focus on?
Okay, thanks, Joyce. There are many options, but I think I would like to focus on what we are doing in Sahel, what we've seen. Like Dr. Michael mentioned, the food system in Nigeria is really challenged. And one of the reasons is because our food system is dependent mainly on smallholder farmers. They make about 80% of that. Our farmers rely on the weather or open field production, which means they are much affected by drought or flooding, because they can't do closed system productions. They don't have the infrastructure or the means to do that. So that affects our food system a lot. So one of the things we know that the farmers used to do before is the fact that they could predict when the rains will start, but they've lost that ability. And that's because the weather, the climate change, and all. And we are thinking, and we think it's very important to give them back that power, that ability to predict when the rains are coming, when it will stop, when it's time to harvest. And to do that, we need agro-med stations. We need the right, the government side to support, the private side to support, and then to make this data available and then to communicate it to the farmers in the way that they can easily access it, in the language that they can understand. I think that is very a big point that we are seeing that we need to work on. And we are working with the Nigerian Met Agency, NIMET, even though NIMET is doing a lot, but their focus is more on aviation. But we think that given the infrastructure they have, they can do more. And just to give some numbers, based on the WMO recommendation, Nigeria will need around 9,000 agro-med stations to really provide the data that the farmers will need. But what we have is less than 200, so that's a far cry. And if you then do some back of the envelope calculations to say that's a lot of money, and we don't think the government can or should be doing that. So there is need for public-private partnership and to make business models, and we are working on this to see how can we develop workable models that can have the public sector invest and recoup their money, and also have this data available to farmers who can use it to then improve production and adapt to the climate. So that's what area we are really focusing on.
Thank you very much. And I hear you mentioned, it's not what government can do, and it's something that we need public-private partnerships and indeed funding. Thankfully, I think it was the gentleman from Access, or no, the lady from Stanbic that said money is available. So definitely you have a long list coming your way. Yeah. So, issues around climate variability has varied effects on men and women in terms of food availability, access to land, nutritional outcomes, and the likes. And indeed, we heard earlier that out of the, I think you said 80% of smallholder farmers, we have farmers here, but 70% of those are women. So that makes a significant number. And in terms of the negative impacts of food insecurity and malnutrition, like Michael alluded to during his remarks, women and children typically bear the brunt. However, we believe that there are proven climate-smart interventions that can help accelerate progress and enhance equity. So, Dr. Hosseini, can you share some proven climate-smart, gender-equitable interventions that have driven inclusion and drive also nutritional outcomes to reduce the negative impact on women and children?
Thank you very much, Joyce. It's quite a helpful question. The interesting thing about climate change, or climate conversation, is that it is not only damaging to the social system, it reinforces existing inequalities and discriminations. And therefore, in our context, our conversations on climate, therefore, rather than actually talking about the change, we talk more about climate justice. That the structure, that the way the climate is changing is as well corresponding with the structure of the society. The weaker segment of the society seems to experience more of the brunt of climate change than the most powerful one. And you see that whether you are looking at it from our global configurations, relationship between the developed and the developing world. Michael did mention that earlier, even though Africa, for instance, contributions to greenhouse emission is relatively low, but the impact of this change is much higher. And that's what you see in relations to gender. That even though men seems to occupy certain more economic and strategic political spaces, but the crisis that people experience is more on women and vulnerable people, especially the poor and children. And therefore, in our context, our interventions must always take into strong cognizance of these structural inequalities. And therefore, as we respond to climate change concerns, we are responding in a manner that is inclusive, that tends to particularize segments of the society that appeared more disadvantaged and quite vulnerable. And so take the food system or food production system, for instance, it's been mentioned here that a significant number of our smallholder farmers who are actually the producers of food that we consume are women. And most of them are relatively economically weak and does not control most of the means of production or have not limited access to it. Land, even where they cultivate, in most part of the country, they don't own those lands. Access to capital is still very limited. And so what we are doing is to find an innovative approach, one that is empowering for women, and two, that makes their survival and adaptability to the vagaries of climate change much better. And one is around climate change or smart or precision agriculture. One major thing that many of us who lead climate conversation don't always take cognizance of, because broadly we have grown and become more technical, is that the peasantry, the smallholder farmers, are really in their own context experts on climate. And they have always farmed and farmed well, largely because they understand their context very, very well. And they can predict. They can look, if an average farmer of those days can look at the sky and tell you that in a month or in 2 weeks, we're going to have rain. And then the rain could stop in so months. But the challenge of these vagaries now is that it has made predictability highly, highly difficult. And farmers are faced with much difficult situations. So part of what we are doing is building that capacity to understand that the methodology that have been useful in the past in these predictions have become socially obsolete. And therefore, it requires a newer approach and better understanding of it. Second is that the kind of crops that you used to plant that survives your previous understanding will also have to shift. And therefore, making seeds access to women farmers, particularly those that are drought resistant, those that can actually have a much quicker yield, have been some of those interventions that we have to take through. Providing alternative livelihoods to increase the resilience of these women by ensuring that within their small spaces, apart from the much larger things that they are doing in their food production system, that even within their immediate environment, they are also able to grow certain kinds of crops that can keep their livelihoods running. Because the biggest challenge you have is when predictability becomes limited, and therefore you lose majorly in terms of your investment in those things. It can become very challenging for women, and therefore alternative livelihood, combining that with what they're used to doing, remains very key. Seed banking have become a major one. Seed is a major issue, and we all know how seed used to be a communal product. Historically, our farming in our community, seeds are communal products. Seeds are such things that sometimes even if you don't have enough, you can go to your neighbor to borrow and you share. But today, seeds have become a major private market issue. And therefore, access is also becoming limited, particularly seed that have better yields, that are more adaptive, that are drought resistant. So women need to be supported with this and also taught on how best those seeds can be managed, and that's what we're doing. And then capital, which is also a major issue. I've heard that a comment here that there is money out there. And but our experience in the field shows that it's actually not there. And the effort has always been, how do we allow for that access to come? So I think these are some of those things that we are doing in ensuring that we are able to beat this whole challenge that vulnerable people are experiencing in relation to climate change.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zini. Indeed, just feel free to clap. Indeed, there's a lot that has to be done to support the vulnerable population, given how things have evolved. The predictability that Chinedu alluded to, the fact that we do have weather stations and a couple of government agencies who also focus on ensuring that that's cascaded down to the local farmers is very key, because climate change has distorted the traditional way of identifying or predicting weather patterns. Okay, well, the important thing for us as we continue our conversations is the fact that food systems are uniquely placed to be climate positive, in that they are the only proven source of carbon sequestration on a large scale. Nature can become a very significant carbon sink and that can help us achieve our climate goals, but we have to allow it to do so. So, Halima, what are the key initiatives of government to reverse these negative trends using a coordinated and inclusive approach, bearing in mind that to address these challenges that we are facing, we have to work collaboratively and collectively?
So thank you, Joyce, and I'm very happy and very honored to be on this esteemed panel. I'm happy to hear what Prof had to say about the water systems and what Chinedu had to also say about the work that needs to be done in climate predictability, weather predictability, and of course, my area of preference, the gender angle of it, by Dr. over here. So, as government, what government does is to facilitate action. It sometimes takes action. And how does government do this? The responsibility of government is that first, we'll set up institutions to enable the governance of whatever action that needs to be taken. For climate change, as we know, climate change is not somebody's country alone. Climate change has no borders, it has no language, it has no tribe. When it comes, the impacts are felt by everybody. Of course, if you're female or young or vulnerable or handicapped, you have the larger share of it. So as a government, we try to put down the institutions and to see how we coordinate climate action that is also derived from the international space. And as we all know, a lot of you went to the COP, UNFCCC COP, Climate COP 29. I did hear Dr. the one that gave the presentation, talk about the COP. Most of the governments put themselves together in that platform to take climate action internationally and nationally. In Nigeria, the government has put down a platform of action by way of establishing the climate change initially in the 90s, late 90s, what we call the climate change unit, which has now transformed into a climate change council towards getting better, more inclusive and more detailed action in the country. What government does too is to establish policies, monitor how they are doing, and things like that. And the most, we've up to in the last 5 years, let's say from 2020 up to now, we've had about 15 policies for different sectors of the economy and different sectors of climate change. We all know that climate change is about what? Reducing the global temperatures and dealing with issues of erratic weather and extreme weather. And in dealing with reduction of temperature rising globally, we agreed globally that we should take action to ensure that we do not pass the 2 degrees mark, but more 1.5 mark. And this we have been able to do. Somebody did talk about the Paris Agreement. It was at Paris, during the Paris Agreement, that we all agreed that, okay, we will commit to actions nationally to reduce temperatures, global temperatures, and we agreed to what we call the nationally determined contributions. In Paris, we did agree at that point to reduce, with our own effort, global temperatures up to 20% in the different sectors of the economy. Because in the different sectors of the economy have been implicated to show that these are where the emissions are coming from, whether it's carbon dioxide, the most known one, the carbon dioxide, and the lesser known but more toxic one, the methane. So we agreed to this. We revised this policy in the NDC in 2021. We are looking at reviewing to the 3.0. Alongside the NDC, we also have made measures towards, it's not just about reducing, that is mitigation, the carbon, it's also about building resilience, coping with what already exists in the atmosphere. We have had how climate change has, and experience of course, how climate change has wiped off several lives, properties, farms, through flooding, which are the classic signs of climate change in Nigeria, through erosion sometimes, land degradation, drought also, and this has a direct effect on crop yield. It has a direct effect on productivity of the land. Climate change also has a direct impact on either increasing or introducing new pests that affect the crop, the food system. So we've worked on issues of adaptation, mitigation. We have also looked at issues of awareness, increasing information to key stakeholders. If you have followed what climate change has been doing over the years, we have what we call the national communications. Of recent, in December, all countries were expected to submit a biennial transparency report, which Nigeria was able to do. This showcases climate action over time and how up to date we have been and how well we've done and where our gaps are. We have also had several about the carbon markets. We have established the carbon office. We have been working in trying to establish a carbon framework, but most importantly, we started building capacity in areas of carbon pricing. Then there's the issue of technology. There are avenues we have liaised within the UNFCCC for technical assistance to projects that are looking to showcase or even adopt innovative technology that can be used within the agricultural sector and the food systems. I did hear a lot of people say about the money that Dr. Here talked about. Well, the carbon market is a very good opportunity to carbon financing. However, as we all know, technicalities of it are just got rounded up in COP29. But does government just hold its arms? No. So we've been able to connect with the Green Climate Fund, connect with the Adaptation Fund, connect with the Loss and Damage Fund, and all other funds international funding that's available out there, and we have tried our best to make these fundings available to projects and entities that have applied for them. We've all heard about what climate change does. Climate change is an opportunity if we look at it. It can be a loss, yes, but it can be an opportunity. Doctor over here has said we can use different kinds of crops now, right? But then we can also move some certain crops traditionally that are known somewhere to other places. So government acts as a facilitator. It acts as sometimes facilitates implementation, but more of looking at, are we really taking the climate action we need to take at the national level? Are we also committing to the international call? The Secretary General of the United Nations, I think last year in April, did make a call to countries to take all actions they can towards food transformation in their countries. And I know that in the COP, the FAO did bring out a new analysis that shows that in as much as our NDCs, most of our NDCs, do not explicitly address issues on food system, but they do address issues on agriculture, inevitably implying food systems. They did also say that most countries have shown in their NDCs that the food systems in adaptation is about 94%. In mitigation is about 91%, implying that the food systems, if properly harnessed and looked at, can be a low-hanging fruit towards emission reduction in the whole value chain of the food systems, from cultivation to processing, to retailing, to consumption, and even waste. So government takes different actions from that beginning point to the end. We used to have what we used to call cradle to grave. So it's about monitoring and trying to reduce emissions from the food systems, from the cradle to the grave, and so far we have had policies to try and address those, and we're taking initiatives to try and address them, including the gender part of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Halima, for a very detailed presentation. And since you still have the mic, yeah, good to see that you've spoken about the various policies that and strategies that we do have in place to address some of these issues. Are you able to share any example of a successful policy intervention in the past couple of years?
Very easy in the NDC. You know, I did hear in the flyers, I did see, Nigeria committed to reducing gas flaring. I have had how we're going to have renewables is there, but what I had silent is not said in the flyer is the part that says we have also committed targets, NDC targets towards adoption of climate smart agriculture and reduction of deforestation, right? So the NDC is basically like the building block for emission reduction, and also at what we call the agricultural, forestry, and land use sector of it, gives us the basis for enabling the sectors of the economy to adapt to the impacts of climate change. So the NDC basically is the Quran, the Bible, of emission reduction and resilience building.
Yeah, so I mean, it's one thing to have those policies in place, and it's another thing to actually be seeing the impact. So my question is around, since we had instituted or developed these policies or strategies, have we seen any measurable impact in terms of reduction?
Measures will have to be done through what we call the MRVs, the measuring, reporting, and verification. But I would think what you might be wanting to say is that, is there any appreciable sign that these are there? For one, all of you in this room came because the advocacy and awareness on climate change has increased over the years. And everybody here has committed in one way or the other. Climate change action is not about government alone. Everyone here has come sitting down here to commit to reducing in its own way its own carbon footprint, what it's doing right and what is doing wrong, what can we do towards reducing emissions or adapting to it. We have seen that even at the states, I see in the flyer, you have a session for the states tomorrow. These actions have started gaining ground even at the state level, not just at the federal level. So I would think that with increasing awareness, advocacy, and knowledge, there has been more compliance towards adopting the measures that the NDC has prescribed for sectors and the adaptation measures for communities.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt, we have to appreciate the fact that there's increased awareness, and I believe for most of us, there's also deliberate action, even in our own little ways in making adjustments. I mean, you do enter some households, well, I don't know what they call it, APDC, NEPA anyway.
AEDC.
You know, some people are not turning off their lights just because of the credits, NEPA credit, but also being, being very deliberate about energy saving and all that, you know.
And there's more adoption of solar.
Absolutely.
You know, apart from, well, the cost and erratic supply, but people are now aware that perhaps going solar, renewable energy, it's the way to go. So those are, well, part of the things that you see that advocacy has helped to kind of tilt the behavioral changes that people can do towards emission reduction and adaptation.
Absolutely. I'm mindful of time, so I'll just ask our two panelists one last closing question. I'll start with you, Michael. What are the top 2 policies or strategies you think would enable us to achieve a wider range of benefits?
Thank you very much, and thanks, Alima, for your presentation. I was actually excited to hear you talk about food systems being a low-hanging fruit, because we talk about this co-benefits or interconnected benefits for exactly that reason, because we see that actions that we take to address climate change have real potential to help us to address food and nutrition insecurity, and the other way around. Just going back very briefly to COP27, where an initiative was launched by the government of Egypt with GAIN and FAO and WHO and others, called ICA, which is the Initiative on Climate and Nutrition. And that identifies a number of options. One of the options is around this implementation. How do we implement plans together? So you've talked about NDCs. Many in this room will know what that means. But there are also NAPs, Nutrition Action Plans, that we, as a government, we make to, we set out plans and promises to the assembly. To what extent are these two things connected, for example? There's something there that we can do. We've talked about the policy and strategy in terms of food production approaches, and I'll come to that to give at least one very practical example. But there are also opportunities around capacity building and data. Do we interchange data between climate and food systems and use that to really focus on what we should be doing? And lastly, we talked about investments. How do we make sure that the investments are helping us to address both of these problems together? But just to give a practical example, and I think there was a bit of an allusion to it earlier. One of the things that we're working on is really, I think we need a national campaign on what you might call climate adapted foods. Yes, I think a couple of pilots have mentioned this a little bit, but we need to really focus on climate adapted crops and technologies. And this is an opportunity for us to to go back to some of those foods that we have forgotten about, neglected, underutilized foods or species. If you go to the market today, you'll probably find, and you want to buy beans, you'll probably find a type of beans with a number of different varieties of that, black-eyed beans. But we have many different types of beans and peas that we no longer consume or you can't easily find in the markets. Yes, cowpea, soybean, mung beans, green beans, lentils of various varieties, red beans, kidney beans, I can go on. But we don't produce them, we don't consume them, so our diets are limited and they're not sufficiently diversified. So one of the things that we're pushing is really to get real action behind going back to these crops because they have co-benefits for climate, not just to diversify our diets and to increase the nutritional content of our meals, but they have co-benefits for climate in terms of helping to fix nutrients back in the soil, reducing the impact of deforestation and soil degradation, and also increasing and improving livelihoods for different people. But maybe just a final word. I think there's also an opportunity to, maybe again going back to government, we do a lot of public procurement of food for institutions or institutional feeding, whether that's school feeding, hospitals, emergency and so on. How about focusing that procurement on some of these adapted foods and really using that as a market shaper to drive investments in those adapted foods or in biofortified crops, which are another type of adapted food. So I think there are a number of opportunities which we can bring together to help us address both the challenge of climate, but also food and nutrition insecurity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Thanks, Joyce. I think for me, I'll maybe kind of try to defend the few people that have taken some passion, climate change. So climate is actually a business. Yes, it's a problem, but there is the business opportunity there, and I think people need to see that. And the second is the banks. People say the banks have said there's money, but maybe they didn't capture it. People are failing. Yeah, it's not free money, right? So
Can you save my number? No,
it's not.
Now I'm still working. 003. I saw your call.
Okay, so it's not free money. You have to repay, and then there is a process that happens, which is why they are careful before they give out that money, which makes it look difficult and all that. So, which then comes to the last point I want to make is that there are lots of people doing different things on climate, sitting in this room or outside of this room, but it's a sector with lots of potential, and we need a national framework for climate services to bring together researchers. People know what the research side is doing, what the government side is doing, what the businesses are doing, what communities are doing, what are the gaps and the opportunities are there, and how can we close those gaps. So I think it's something that Nigeria as a country needs to do, and we also at Sahel Consulting, together with the project partners we're working on, we are trying to convene a workshop, a small workshop on that, to see how we develop that out, and then to make sure that people see the different opportunities that they can take advantage of. So I think that's a practical step I would say works. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chinedu. And last thing that we'll say.
Thank you. Just to add, it is important that our climate policies and frameworks are inclusive. And I think, and I'm saying this in relations to women in particular, that we don't bring up gender conversations in a very anecdotal or afterthought kind of manner, and that's what we have seen. There's a tendency to see policies as neutral or gender neutral, just a neutral person. We're just talking about our national development we're talking about our response to climate change, and then we couch it in a very neutral language without specifically recognizing what I mentioned earlier, those differences and how climate change impacts on different segments of our society differently. And therefore the justice element in climate conversations need to be brought to the fore. But what we have seen with policies and major frameworks in this country is that they are couched in neutral languages, and then later on we will develop another thing and say this is for this particular category of people, and you never get mainstreamed, and you never get to work. So if you have offices, agencies that are responsible for climate change, and we have that eloquently presented to us by Asia in terms of what government is doing. But when it gets deeply localized in one office and it's not cascaded, what's the link with Ministry of Agriculture? How is Ministry of Women Affairs involved? How is it linked to the Ministry of Finance, for instance? That kind of operational networking is really very important for us to actually be able to deliver. The second, for me, is that yes, climate change can also be an opportunity. But again, if this opportunity is not properly managed, it explodes. And that's for me one of the major differences between our conversations on MDGs when they started and now SDG when it came with. The major difference is the recognition that the private sector have a very important role to play. The MDG didn't recognize that, and SDG brought that. And we've seen all that in our conversations and negotiations in the COP process. But the emphasis on market and the role of the private sector in terms of scale and investment is not a bad idea. But the tendency for it to actually benefit the powerful and the rich, because this is what money does, is always quite very high. And each time I get into these conversations, I got into it with the fear that the more we emphasize it, the more we exclude the vulnerable segment of our society. And therefore, our conversations must take very strong note of this, and that whereas there is an opportunity to make profit from this process, profit must be made responsibly. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hosseini. No doubt we shouldn't put profits over the larger public good. So we still have very few minutes to take questions or interventions from our audience.
Thank you so much for this discussion. So the first question I have is to Dr. So do we not exchange one kind of food insecurity for the other when we don't have the patent for our seeds? Then the second question I have is to Halima. Now that we see that COP is disintegrating, first with the walkout of nations during COP29, then the US pulling out of COP, what is the essence of our nationally determined contribution when we only contribute 0.1% to global emissions as a nation, and countries that contribute 20 or more percent are pulling out of global agreements? Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Saima Ahmed Abdullahi from Nasaim. Mrs. Halima rightly said that at the urban level, there is a great progress in adopting measures to mitigate climate change. But it's obvious that most of our agricultural production comes from the rural areas. So now, my question is, how then can these local communities be adequately empowered to adopt these necessary practices to mitigate climate change, and also to build resilience to the effects that are already on ground? Thank you.
Okay, one last question from the gentleman.
My name is Aziz Salau. I'm a member of the National Food Systems Transformation Pathway in Nigeria. And my question goes to Ajay Halima. Thank you so much, panelists. It's good you mentioned the Convergence Initiative by the UN Food Systems Coordination Hub. And in other countries, the engagement has actually commenced. I could remember discussing with Joyce 2 weeks ago, seeing how we can actually start this conversation of infusing the food systems. We understand that it's a long agri-foods, and we understand the impact or the effects it can actually really help concerning climate change. So how can we commence this conversation? Launching or starting up with the Convergence Initiative in Nigeria, and start seeing how we can start including the food systems pathways to our NDCs and also our NAP. So we've been trying to see how we can get some entry points, and thank God this conversation is really coming. The national convener is set, and I think if we're able to achieve this, it would really be a plus for us when we are reporting at UNFSS +4. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think everyone's bombarding Halima. So, you can take on some of the questions and the other panelists would support. Yeah.
And I thank you all for the questions. Regarding the question on why bother about contributing to the NDCs when Africa contributes the least amount, I did hear Dr. earlier saying it's about 5%, it's not even up to 5%. In African Group of Negotiators, we still think it's about 3 or 4% actually. So why bother? The question is, why not bother? Aren't you feeling the heat? Are you or aren't you feeling the heat? The increasing heat, are you or are you not? Are you not also experiencing the flooding that has come across the country in places that there was hardly any such occurrences, like in Jigawa at a certain time of the year, and Katsina at some time, you see animals just floating because of the flooding. So, in as much as we do not contribute that much, we are all feeling impact. And that is where the arguments are when you also observe that there was a walkout. The historic greenhouse gases in the atmosphere over thousands of years, but Africa is now having to deal with the impacts of it. And when we say we will need support in trying to mitigate or adapt to these impacts, we get a pushback, and that's where you find the walkouts. But then the issue is that whether we contribute very little or none, we're having the effects already in our country, and we also need to do something, whether it's aligning with the international community or just the national level action. With regards communities in participation in climate action. Climate action, yes, maybe the federal level takes the lead in formulation of policies and implementation of programs and whatever. But the real action is where? At the rural level, at the community level. So what we've been trying to do over the years is to cascade some of these, include them in the participation, and I think things have gotten a bit better. The states are much more involved now, and hopefully that goes down to the local government. We can have a conversation about this later. We also see that within the communities, the priority for Nigeria is agriculture, is water, is energy, and biodiversity conservation or afforestation, whatever name you want to call that. So we are working within that area to work with the communities in those areas that particularly are important to the local communities, especially women, which we've identified in the LabGCC. Somebody did bring up an issue about the agro-food systems. Yes, I did say it's a low-hanging fruit because if you look at the food systems from cultivation all the way to consumption and waste, there's something that is being emitted. There's carbon, there's methane. So it depends on whether it's the crop part of it, the animal part of it, or a combination part of the food systems. There is an opportunity of reducing emissions in those areas. What we have done, what I didn't get to say earlier is that, and it was brought up, it's not just the National Council on Climate Change doing all the work, but we partner. The SDGs have already shown us 17 that we need to partner, and that's what we have been doing. And those of you in the room that have been working with the machinery of the Federal Ministry of Environment at that point in time, we used to have what we call the Inter-Ministerial Committee on Climate Change that has now become updated to the Council. So partnerships are very important to us. This has been exemplified and shown and encouraged in the NDC that there's a need for public-private partnership, there is a need for all of society kind of partnership, and there's a need for all of sector partnerships. Nobody can do it by themselves.
Any words from the panelists? Okay, if not, two questions from this side of the
I think
board.
there's a question on the seed and patent, sorry. Seed patent that a lady raised. So maybe I'll respond first. And then, so I think one thing that needs to be made clear is that there are different seed systems. When you talk about the patent, that's a formal seed system. And why the reason for the patent is that researchers want to recoup the investment they made in innovation. And you also want them to keep investing in innovation, and then when they can get patent to then recoup their money. But be rest assured, from experience and also from common sense, there is no big organization that is going to take a smallholder farmer to court for using his seed, because it doesn't make economic sense to him. And businesses are very money smart, so they won't do that. But another way to also look at it is that what kind of farmers are we looking at, right? If a commercial farmer of large size, let's say for instance, a processor of maize for production of poultry feed, he buys seed in a certain different way. The smallholder farmer also buys seed, like Doctor was mentioning, locally. So there is that communal exchange of seed. That still exists. We are not, nobody should stop that. And we rather should invest to support it, for it to provide seeds to the smallholder farmers and ensure that they have the right seed. So I think that's the difference we need to make. For the patent, it's more for the farmer, for the large commercial farmers, they try to make payment for the licenses. And then for the smaller farmers, we need to have a more community managed seed system to ensure that they have the right kind of seed that they need for their production. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Hello.
Go on, sir.
Thank you very much. I want to intervene on this climate change and the seed politics. The essence of patenting seeds is because somebody has succeeded in improving the seeds. Because we know when we were young, our parents would choose from their harvest the best and then keep that as seed for the next cropping season. Now, we were made to understand that that is not enough because it affects, these seeds will not withstand issues like desertification and then flooding. So there is a need to improve them. Improving them is what now gives people the mandate to patent what they have improved. But if improving has succeeded, it means that this last time we had flooding, the seeds should have withstood flooding. But if they did not withstand flooding, it means that actually there wasn't much improvement. Now, the politics is about certified seeds and foundation seeds. It is a strategy, and I'm happy that Dr. Abdul had addressed it tangentially. It is a strategy to make sure that Africa is not self-subsistent in food. Because if we have to buy the seeds And these seeds cannot go beyond one planting season. They don't have the capacity to regenerate. It means that our necks are held by those who supply the seeds. And it means that any time those people decide that we must die of hunger, they will decide not to give us the seeds. So why should a country like Nigeria, for instance, accept that seeds should be patented? My own proposal to this forum is that we should come up with a resolution to ensure that we do not support the patenting of seeds, because clearly the overall objective of patenting had not succeeded in addressing the problem of food insufficiency in Nigeria, and it is running the farmers, the local farmers, out of business. Right from the onset, you have to pay a lot of money before you can get the seeds, and then you are given certified seeds which do not have the capacity to regenerate beyond one cropping season, and then the next you would have to also pay for other ingredients in the farm, and at the end of the day, if there is flooding, you lose everything and you are run out of business. I rest my case. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that case, sir. All right.
From there.
So
Sorry, somebody asked the question on the low-hanging fruit of including the food systems in the NDC, and he wanted to know how to go about it. What you could do is what happens, you are at the right stage now. NDC 3.0 is about being developed. So if you are an organization and you can link up with the NDC partnership, support for NDC development and implementation is through the NDC partnership. So if you have a particular element you want to see in the NDC, like the food systems, you can also link up with the NDC partnership. There's a country facilitator, and you come with the support that it will take to consider and include in Nigeria's NDC 3.0. Thank you.
I just want to add, and I can understand why the speaker before Hajia got the ovation around the questioning of seed patenting. And I appreciate the fact that you carefully used seed politics, and that is clearly what it is. I was whispering to Ajay here that years past, one of my major work was around campaign against seed patenting. And it was a Pan-African initiative to question why seed have to be patented. And unfortunately, the way things go around this world, our business people have learned to understand that once you have a massive role of campaign, you just pipe low, because campaigns go in a waves, and once that wave is over, you resurface, and then you don't even have anybody who will challenge you. It's a big conversation in Asia, and it's also a huge conversation in Latin America around foundation seeds and certified seed, and that who actually owns the patents. And I know some of you here may be very familiar with that debate, and that has a strong implication for food security, because what keeps seeds rolling, what makes seeds communal in our traditional processes is the fact that you can cultivate it year in, year out. But when seeds can expire, then you have a fundamental problem, that the seed have an expiry date. And for our agronomists, you may even ask the question, do you then call that a seed? In the real sense of it. And we're struggling with the whole challenge of GMO. I know that's also another line of debate and conversation and wonderful. But yeah, and gene banks and other, they are all issues that we are debating and we're discussing. But my sense about it in Nigeria is to keep the conversation on and keep asking those questions. Because we also know that we have capacity for even in some of our universities in the country, for biotechnological work. And there are evidence in many of our agricultural universities that they have done some excellent work around some of those things that don't even expire in any way. Why are we not promoting those ones? And I think that's very important, because if you don't do that, you will find yourself in a situation that many countries in the developed world have found themselves, where farming has become only a big-time business, and that even to farm, to have a garden in your house, is not even allowed by law in some countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please, another round of applause for our panelists. Yeah, so I mean, key things have emerged in terms of issues that we need to focus on. First, we need to continue to spread the gospel about climate change, its impact, and the impact of food systems related activity on the climate, and taking deliberate actions as well to address some of these issues that emerge. Investment in agro stations for increased information to local farmers, that's very key, and that's an opportunity for public-private partnerships. Then, encourage the adoption of climate-smart agricultural practices, and also investment in research and development for the development and scaling of climate-adapted crops and technology. Diversifying our diets to include underutilized crops which have some positive impact on our environment. Also, we talked about the need to be very deliberate in taking into cognizance vulnerable populations in the design and development of policies and frameworks that address climate change, so inclusive policies. And the private sector has a huge role to play in addressing the challenges of climate change, but it's important that that's also done in a very sustainable and responsible manner. And lastly, the need for collective action, partnership, and collaboration at all levels. While government has a role to play, each and every one of us as organizations, as individuals, as civil society, as academia, do have our own role to play. So as we go on, let's continue to spread awareness around the fact that we need to, in our own little way, take actions that positively impact on our climate, even as we carry out our own various activities. So on that note, thank you very much for listening, and thank you for engaging. Thank you again to our panelists for sharing from your depth of knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you for that interesting session and for all the contributions from the audience. We've come to the end.